It began with a hurried note and ended in a shallow grave beside a quiet Cheshire canal. This is the true story of Herbert Wilkinson. Every town has a story it prefers to tell and another it would rather forget. The first is usually about familiar streets, respectable families, and ordinary routines. The second begins when someone steps out of that routine and never returns. In Middlewich, Cheshire, that moment came on Friday, June 2, 1967, when a former solicitor named Herbert Wilkinson left a hurried note for his housekeeper, walked away from his home, and vanished. There was no public account of a struggle inside the house. No confirmed final conversation has survived in the accessible record. No reliable witness timeline traces his movements after he left. The note itself has never been published in full, and no verified photograph of it has surfaced. All that remains is the knowledge that Wilkinson wrote something quickly, left it behind, and disappeared into a gap that investigators would never fully close. Herbert Wilkinson was known locally as a former solicitor. Later accounts sometimes referred to him as Birdie, though that nickname does not appear in the strongest surviving contemporary material. His exact age is also uncertain. Different sources place him between 52 and 54, so the safest conclusion is that he was in his early 50s. He was unmarried, lived in Middlewich, and had practiced law in the town. Later local histories place his home on Nantwich Road and his office on Wheelock Street, though those locations come from retrospective accounts rather than an openly available police file. For years, Wilkinson had occupied a profession built on trust. A solicitor in a small town was not simply another businessman. He handled private matters, legal disputes, property concerns, and personal information. That position could make a person respected, but it could also place him close to conflict. By the beginning of 1967, Wilkinson's professional life had collapsed. His practice was described in later accounts as being in serious trouble, and he had been removed from the role of solicitors before his disappearance. The precise date of that disciplinary action remains disputed. Some accounts place it around March of 1967. Another later source suggests the end of 1966. The original decision has not been located in the publicly accessible record, and the full reasons behind it remain unclear. No verified open source establishes the exact financial losses, the names of affected clients, or the specific misconduct involved. What can be stated is that Wilkinson had lost the profession that had defined him, and that his disappearance followed within months. One later reconstruction described him during that period as unwell in both mind and body. That phrase has been repeated in retellings, but it was not a published medical diagnosis. It came from a later account, and it should be treated as a description rather than proof of his condition. Even so, the picture that emerges is of a man under considerable pressure. His status had fallen, his business had failed, and his future had become uncertain. That background created an immediate problem when he vanished. A man who had lost his career might leave voluntarily. He might travel, avoid creditors, or distance himself from public embarrassment. Investigators had to consider those possibilities. But as the weeks passed, no confirmed trail emerged. There was no publicly documented journey, no verified message sent after June 2nd, and no reliable sighting that established Wilkinson had started a new life elsewhere. The summer passed without an answer. Then, in October, the case changed completely. Two young men were searching for fox dens in the countryside near Whatcroft, between Middlewich and Northwich. The area lay close to Whatcroft Hall and the Trent and Mersey Canal. It was rural, quiet, and separated from the busier roads and streets of the nearby towns. During their search, they came across a shallow grave. Inside were badly decomposed human remains. The body had been hidden but not buried deeply. Exposure, soil, and the passage of several months made identification difficult. Later accounts state that clothing and a pair of brogue-style shoes helped police connect the remains to Herbert Wilkinson. The publicly available sources do not provide a complete forensic identification record, so it is not possible to say whether dental records, fingerprints, or other methods played a role. What the surviving accounts make clear is that investigators ultimately accepted the body as Wilkinson's. His disappearance was no longer a question of whether he had chosen to leave. He had been killed and concealed beside the canal. The condition of the remains limited what could be determined about the exact cause of death. Later reports referred to two possibilities: strangulation or a severe blow to the head. The complete post-mortem report has not been publicly made available, so neither method should be presented as a single confirmed conclusion. What investigators and the later inquest did establish was that Wilkinson's death was the result of murder. The location of the grave quickly became one of the most important clues. The site was isolated, and later accounts state that detectives believed it was difficult to reach over land without drawing attention. That led to the theory that Wilkinson's body had been transported along the Trent and Mersey Canal. The theory was never proven in court, but it shaped the investigation. A boat could have carried a body through the countryside with less chance of being noticed than a car stopping near a remote burial site. The canal also connected Middlewich with other communities, creating a long route with many possible entry and exit points. If the killer had used the waterway, police needed to identify who had been traveling through the area around the time Wilkinson disappeared. The response was enormous for a case centered on one missing man from a small Cheshire town. Later archival reconstructions describe more than 60 detectives working the inquiry. They reportedly gathered about 800 written statements, questioned roughly 8,000 people in the Middlewich area, and contacted approximately 9,000 others across the country who may have used the canal during June of 1967. Those figures come from later sources that appear to rely on archival material, though the original complete police file is not openly available. The scale of the inquiry shows how seriously detectives treated the canal theory. They were not searching only for a killer, they were trying to reconstruct a movement that may have lasted minutes and left almost no physical trace. A boat might have passed through a lock, tied up briefly, or moved along the water after dark. Someone could have seen it without understanding its significance. By the time police began asking questions, months had passed, and small details may already have been forgotten. Then, on November 24, 1967, a newspaper report introduced one of the strangest details in the case. Detectives were said to believe they knew the identity of a couple who had been seen in a canoe. The report did not name them, it did not explain where they had been seen, when the sighting occurred, or why investigators considered them relevant. No accessible follow-up states whether they were questioned, cleared, or connected to another boat. The couple entered the public story for a moment and then disappeared from it. That silence leaves several possibilities, but none can be treated as fact. They may have been ordinary canal users. They may have been witnesses. They may have seen something investigators considered valuable. There is no reliable public evidence that they were suspects, and no responsible account should imply guilt. Their importance comes from what the report reveals about the direction of the inquiry. Police were examining specific movements on the canal and believed at least one sighting deserved further attention. Wilkinson's professional collapse remained another possible line of inquiry. His removal from the solicitor's role may have created financial disputes, anger, shame, or fear of exposure. Yet the accessible record does not name any client, creditor, colleague, or business associate as a suspect. No verified source links a specific professional conflict to his murder. The connection is possible because of the timing, but possibility is not evidence. Later local retellings also circulated private rumors about Wilkinson. Those claims have never been supported by an openly available contemporary document or official record. They do not identify a killer, establish a motive, or explain his final movements. Without stronger evidence, repeating them would add speculation rather than understanding. The case already contains enough uncertainty without turning local gossip into a narrative fact. What can be examined is the way Wilkinson appears to have left home. There is no public indication that his house was the scene of a violent attack. That does not prove he left willingly with another person, but it raises the possibility that the fatal encounter happened somewhere else. He may have gone to meet someone, entered a vehicle, walked toward a familiar destination, or traveled by another route. The surviving evidence does not allow any one of those possibilities to become a confirmed sequence. The lack of a last verified sighting is one of the case's greatest weaknesses. Investigators could not build a precise timeline between the note and the burial. Without that timeline, it was difficult to determine where Wilkinson was killed, how long he remained alive after leaving home, or when his body reached Whatcroft. Every missing hour increased the number of possible locations and suspects. By March of 1968, the case reached the inquest stage in Northwich. The jury returned a verdict that Herbert Wilkinson had been murdered by a person or persons unknown. Contemporary reporting described him as a former solicitor whose body had been found in a small grave beside the Trent and Mersey Canal. The verdict confirmed the central truth of the case, but it did not identify who had killed him. The investigation continued. On August 23, 1968, the Chester Chronicle reported that a special squad of detectives was still working on the Wilkinson inquiry. That meant police had not simply closed the file after the inquest. Months after the discovery of the body, they were still pursuing leads. Later retellings introduced the belief that detectives may have known the killer's identity but lacked enough evidence to prosecute. No surviving public primary source confirms that claim. No official statement names a suspect, and no arrest or charge appears in the accessible record. The idea may have developed from local memory, from the size of the inquiry, or from information held outside the public record. Without documentation, it remains a belief rather than a proven part of the investigation. The limitations of forensic science in 1967 may help explain why suspicion, even if focused, could not become a case. DNA profiling did not exist. The remains had been exposed for months. The burial site may have been disturbed by weather, animals, and the young men who discovered it. Any vehicle or boat involved could have been cleaned, sold, or moved before investigators identified it. A killer who left no witness and no clear physical trail had a major advantage. The case was later revisited in local historical writing. A retrospective account published in 2002 described it as officially open. Further local coverage in 2017 and regional crime reporting in 2018 continued to present Wilkinson's murder as unsolved. A modern podcast returned to the story in 2024. No recent public police appeal, forensic breakthrough, or confirmed reinvestigation was identified in the sources reviewed. That does not mean nothing has happened inside official archives. It means only that no modern development has been publicly documented in the material available for this case. The original inquest papers, full post-mortem findings, police witness statements, disciplinary records, and the handwritten note could still contain details that have never reached the public. What remains is a narrow chain of confirmed events. Herbert Wilkinson left a note for his housekeeper on June 2, 1967. He disappeared from Middlewich. His remains were found in October near Whatcroft in a shallow grave beside the Trent and Mersey Canal. Investigators believe the location may have been reached by boat. Thousands of people were questioned. A couple seen in a canoe became part of the inquiry. The inquest declared that Wilkinson had been murdered by an unknown person or unknown people. The unanswered questions are more specific. Who expected to see Wilkinson that day? Did he leave home for a routine reason, or had someone arranged a meeting? Was his professional collapse connected to the motive, or was it a distraction that misled investigators? Why was the burial site chosen? Did the killer know the canal well enough to move through it unnoticed? And what did the police learn about the unidentified couple in the canoe? The most haunting part of the case is not the number of missing details. It is how close the investigation may have come to an answer without ever crossing the final distance. Detectives gathered hundreds of statements, questioned thousands of people, and continued working long after the inquest. They had a body, a burial site, a possible transport route, and a small town filled with people who knew Wilkinson's name. Still, no one was convicted. The Trent and Mersey Canal continues through Cheshire today, passing quiet banks, open fields, and the area near Whatcroft where Wilkinson was found. The landscape has changed, but the central mystery has not. Somewhere between his home in Middlewich and that shallow grave, Herbert Wilkinson met the person who killed him. The note he left behind may have been ordinary, or it may have contained the first clue. The surviving public record does not tell us which. Herbert Wilkinson's body was recovered. His death was formally recognized as murder. His killer was never publicly identified. And after all the interviews, all the statements, and all the years that followed, the final part of his story remains missing.